Marcus Thompson adjusted his red ceremonial tunic for the third time that morning, feeling the weight of curious stares from his fellow guards. At 32, he was older than most of the recruits who had joined the Queen's Guard alongside him. His weathered hands and the small scar above his left eyebrow told stories that his official record didn't reveal. The other guards whispered among themselves as they prepared for their monthly firearms training. James Patterson, a cocky 24-year-old from a military family, seemed to take particular pleasure in making jokes about Marcus's quiet demeanor. "Look at Thompson there," James snorted to his friends. "Bet he's never even held a real weapon before this job. Probably thinks that ceremonial sword is actually meant for fighting." Marcus said nothing, methodically checking his gear with the practiced movements of someone who had done this countless times before. His silence only seemed to encourage the younger guard's mockery. "I heard he worked some desk job before this," another guard chimed in. "Probably thinks standing still for hours makes him tough." The training sergeant, a burly man named Williams, called the group to attention. "Right then, gentlemen. Today we're heading to the range for quarterly assessments. For those of you who are new, this isn't about looking pretty in your uniform. When you're protecting the royal family, you need to be able to handle a weapon properly." As they boarded the transport vehicle, Marcus found himself sitting alone while the younger guards clustered together, their conversation peppered with boastful claims about their shooting abilities. James was particularly vocal about his marksmanship medals from basic training. "Watch and learn, old man," James called over to Marcus with a smirk. "I'll show you how it's really done." Marcus simply nodded politely, his gray eyes revealing nothing of the thoughts behind them. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best response was no response at all. The convoy moved through London's busy streets toward the military training facility, where each guard would be tested on their weapons proficiency. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that these young men, so eager to prove themselves, had no idea they were sitting next to someone who had once been considered one of the most lethal marksmen in the British military. His past was locked away in classified files, known only to a select few in the intelligence community. As they approached the firing range, Marcus felt a familiar calm settle over him. The sounds of traffic faded into background noise as his mind automatically began calculating wind conditions, light angles, and distance measurements. Old habits died hard, especially ones that had kept him alive in some of the world's most dangerous places. The training facility loomed ahead, its concrete walls and serious atmosphere, a stark contrast to the ornate palaces where these men usually stood guard. Today would be different from their usual ceremonial duties. Today they would discover what each man was truly made of when it mattered most. The firing range buzzed with nervous energy as 20 royal guards filed into the briefing room. The walls were lined with safety posters and regulations, while the smell of gun oil and cleaning solvents hung in the air. Marcus took a seat in the back row, his practiced eye automatically noting the exits and sight lines from habit. Sergeant Williams stood before a whiteboard covered in target diagrams and scoring charts. "Gentlemen, today's assessment consists of 3 phases: close quarters at 10 meters, standard accuracy at 50 meters, and long-range precision at 200 meters. You'll be scored on accuracy, speed, and weapon handling." James Patterson raised his hand eagerly. "Sergeant, what's the record for this course?" Williams consulted his clipboard. The current record holder hit 96% accuracy across all 3 phases, set by a former SAS operative who did this training 5 years ago. "Doubt any of you ceremonial soldiers will come close to that." The guards exchanged nervous glances. 96% was an impossibly high standard for most military personnel, let alone guards who spent most of their time standing motionless outside palaces. "Right then," Williams continued, "we'll start with weapon inspection and safety briefing. Each man will be issued a Glock 17 pistol. Remember, these are live rounds, not the blanks you're used to for ceremonial purposes." As they moved to the equipment area, Marcus watched the younger guards fumble with their weapons. Despite their bravado, most of them were clearly uncomfortable with the pistols. James managed to look confident, but Marcus noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he checked the magazine. "Thompson," Williams barked, "you're up first for the safety demonstration." Marcus stepped forward and accepted the weapon from the range master. His movements were fluid and automatic, checking the chamber, testing the trigger mechanism, examining the sights with the unconscious competence of someone who had performed these actions thousands of times. "At least someone knows what they're doing," Williams muttered, though he seemed surprised by Marcus's obvious familiarity with the weapon. Right, follow Thompson's example. Treat every weapon as if it's loaded. Never point it at anything you don't intend to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until ready to shoot. The other guards watched Marcus's demonstration with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. Even James looked less certain of himself as he observed the older guard's professional handling of the firearm. Lucky guess, James whispered to his friend Danny. Probably watched some YouTube videos before coming here. But Danny wasn't so sure. There was something about the way Marcus moved, the way he held himself, that suggested this wasn't beginner's luck. The older guard's hands showed none of the nervousness that plagued the rest of them. As they prepared to move to the first firing position, Marcus remained quiet and focused. He could feel the familiar weight of the weapon in his hand, could sense the balance and precision of the instrument. Memories threatened to surface. Memories of desert compounds, urban warfare, and impossible shots taken under extreme pressure. He pushed those thoughts aside and concentrated on the present moment. Today he was just another Royal Guard, here to qualify on the weapons he might need to protect the people he had sworn to serve. The fact that he had once been one of Britain's most elite soldiers was irrelevant now, or so he told himself. The first firing lane awaited, and with it, the beginning of what would prove to be a very revealing day for everyone present. The first phase began at the 10-meter range, where each guard would fire 15 rounds at a standard silhouette target. The scoring was simple, 10 points for the center ring, decreasing to 1 point for the outer edges. James Patterson volunteered to go first, eager to establish his dominance. "Watch this, boys," James announced, taking his position in the shooting lane. He adopted what he thought was a professional stance. Feet spread wide, arms extended dramatically. The other guards gathered behind the safety line, some offering encouragement while others placed informal bets on the scores. James's first shot rang out, followed quickly by 14 more in rapid succession. The electronic scoring system showed his target, revealing a scattered pattern across the target with several complete misses. His final score flashed on the screen, 47 out of a possible 150 points. "Not bad for a warm-up," James said loudly, though his face had reddened with embarrassment. The sights must be off on this weapon. Several other guards took their turns, with scores ranging from 32 to 61 points. The pattern was consistent: scattered shots, poor groupings, and obvious signs of inexperience with live ammunition. Sergeant Williams shook his head as each disappointing score was recorded. "Thompson, you're up," Williams called, clearly expecting more of the same mediocre performance. Marcus stepped up to the firing line and took his position. Unlike the dramatic stances adopted by the younger guards, his posture was natural and relaxed. He raised the weapon smoothly, his breathing automatically falling into the rhythm he had learned years ago in training that these men could never imagine. The first shot broke with perfect surprise, the result of a trigger pull that was both deliberate and instinctive. Marcus didn't pause to check the target. His muscle memory had already confirmed what the scoring system would soon reveal. He fired the remaining 14 rounds in a steady, controlled sequence, each shot placed with surgical precision. The electronic display updated to show Marcus's target. Every single hole was clustered in the center ring, with several shots overlapping in the exact center of the bullseye. The score flashed, 147 out of 150 points. The range fell silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Even Sergeant Williams stared at the display, his mouth slightly open. The other guards exchanged bewildered glances, their earlier mockery forgotten in the face of this impossible performance. "Equipment malfunction," James said quickly. "Has to be. Nobody shoots like that without years of training." But the rangemaster, a civilian instructor with 30 years of experience, was already examining the target through high-powered binoculars. "No malfunction," he announced. "This is legitimate. I've seen maybe 3 shooters in my entire career put up a group this tight." Marcus remained calm as he stepped back from the firing line, though he could feel 20 pairs of eyes studying him with new interest. He had tried to hold back, to blend in with the other guards, but muscle memory and years of training had taken over the moment he raised the weapon. Danny, one of the quieter guards, approached hesitantly. "Marcus, mate, where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Just paid attention during basic training," Marcus replied quietly, though everyone present knew that was impossible. No amount of basic training could produce marksmanship of that caliber. James's face had gone from red to pale as the implications sank in. Someone he had been mocking and dismissing had just demonstrated a level of skill that bordered on the supernatural, but his pride wouldn't let him admit the obvious truth. Lucky first round, James insisted. Let's see how he does when the pressure really builds up. Sergeant Williams checked his watch and his scoring sheets. Right then, gentlemen. Phase 2 is at 50 meters. Things get a bit more challenging from here. He looked directly at Marcus with newfound respect and curiosity. Thompson, you'll go last this time. Give the others a chance to impress us first. The 50-meter range presented a new challenge. The targets were smaller, the distance greater, and the wind conditions more noticeable. Each guard would fire 20 rounds with a time limit that tested both accuracy and speed under pressure. The passing score was 60%, and historically, only half the guards managed to achieve it. James Patterson had regained some of his confidence during the walk to the longer range. He convinced himself that Marcus's performance had been a fluke, possibly aided by equipment that favored the closer distance. 50 meters would separate the real marksmen from the lucky amateurs. This is where experience really shows, James announced to anyone who would listen. Close range is just point and shoot. Real shooting starts here. The first several guards struggled even more than they had at 10 meters. The increased distance amplified every flaw in their technique: poor trigger control, inconsistent grip, and fundamental misunderstanding of sight alignment. Scores ranged from 22 to 48 points out of a possible 200. James took his position with renewed determination. He had practiced this distance during his military service and felt confident he could redeem himself. His stance was more conservative this time, his approach more measured. The 20 rounds took him nearly 3 minutes to complete, and when finished, he felt satisfied with his performance. His score appeared on the display: 74 points. It was respectable, easily the best score of the day so far, and James felt vindicated. He turned to face the other guards with a broad smile. Now that's how it's done, he said proudly. 74 points. Beat that, old man. The other guards offered congratulations, though many seemed distracted by anticipation of Marcus's performance. The quiet older guard had become an object of intense curiosity, and even the range staff had gathered to watch his second round. Marcus approached the firing line with the same calm demeanor he had shown earlier. He took his position, checked his weapon, and raised it toward the target. There was no hesitation, no visible effort to aim. He simply looked at the target and began firing. The 20 rounds were completed in less than 90 seconds, each shot flowing naturally from the last. Marcus's breathing never changed. His stance never wavered, and his hands remained perfectly steady throughout the entire sequence. To the observers, it looked almost mechanical in its precision. The scoring system processed the results, and the display updated to show Marcus's target. Once again, every shot had found the center ring, with most clustering in an area smaller than a playing card. The score was devastating: 191 out of 200 possible points. The silence this time lasted nearly a full minute. James's proud smile faded as he stared at the impossible numbers on the display. Even Sergeant Williams seemed stunned by the performance he had just witnessed. Right, Williams said finally, his voice slightly hoarse. That's the second highest score I've ever recorded at this distance, in 20 years of running this course. The range master was already on the phone, presumably calling his supervisors. A score like this would need to be verified and documented. Meanwhile, the other guards stood in small groups, whispering among themselves and stealing glances at Marcus. Who is this guy? Danny asked quietly. I mean, really, who is he? Marcus himself seemed uncomfortable with the attention. He stepped back from the firing line and began cleaning his weapon with methodical precision, avoiding eye contact with his fellow guards. But the damage was done. Any possibility of remaining anonymous had evaporated with those 20 perfectly placed shots. James Patterson stood frozen in place, his earlier bravado completely deflated. The man he had spent months mocking and dismissing had just demonstrated skills that James could never hope to achieve, no matter how much he practiced. But there was still one more phase to go, and James clung to the desperate hope that the 200-meter range would somehow level the playing field. Sergeant Williams consulted his clipboard with shaking hands. The day had taken a turn he had never anticipated. and he was beginning to suspect that Marcus Thompson was far more than just another ceremonial guard who had stumbled into the Queen's service. The 200-meter range was a different world entirely. Here, factors like wind speed, humidity, and even the Earth's rotation could affect shot placement. The targets were barely visible to the naked eye, and each guard would fire only 10 rounds due to the complexity and time required for each shot. Most ceremonial guards had never attempted precision shooting at this distance. Word of Marcus's extraordinary performance had spread through the facility. Range instructors, administrative staff, and even some off-duty personnel had gathered to witness the final phase of testing. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation and curiosity. James Patterson felt sick to his stomach as he prepared for his turn. The man he had ridiculed for months had systematically destroyed every assumption about skill and training that James had held. But pride is a stubborn thing, and James refused to accept what everyone else was beginning to understand. 200 meters is a completely different game, James told Danny nervously. This is where natural talent runs out and real training shows. Watch him struggle now. But even as he spoke the words, James didn't believe them. He had seen enough to know that Marcus possessed skills far beyond anything that could be explained by luck or basic military training. Still, he had to try to salvage something from this humiliating day. James's performance at 200 meters was predictably poor. Fighting wind conditions he didn't understand and using techniques he had never properly learned, he managed only 18 points out of a possible 100. It was a respectable score for someone of his limited experience, but it felt like failure in the context of the day's events. The other guards fared no better, with scores ranging from 8 to 23 points. Many of their shots missed the target entirely, disappearing into the earthen backstop beyond. Sergeant Williams recorded each disappointing result with growing resignation. "Thompson," Williams called, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "You're up for the final phase." As Marcus approached the firing line, the crowd of observers pressed closer to the safety barrier. Camera phones appeared despite regulations prohibiting them. Everyone present sensed they were about to witness something extraordinary, something they would talk about for years to come. Marcus accepted the precision rifle offered by the range master, a different weapon entirely from the pistols they had been using. This was a specialized tool designed for long-range accuracy, equipped with sophisticated optics and precision-engineered components. Marcus handled it with the same casual familiarity he had shown with every other weapon. He spent several minutes adjusting the scope and checking the rifle's balance. Unlike the rapid fire of the previous phases, long-range precision shooting required patience and methodical preparation. Marcus examined the wind flags placed along the range, noted the angle of the afternoon sun, and made microscopic adjustments to his position. The first shot broke after what seemed like an eternity of aiming. Through the spotting scope, the range master could see a perfect center hit. The second shot followed 2 minutes later, equally precise. Marcus worked with mechanical consistency, each shot placed with the same impossible accuracy. When the 10 rounds were complete, Marcus lowered the rifle and stepped back from the firing line. The range master studied the target through high-powered optics before announcing the results over the loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a perfect score, 100 points out of 100 possible. All 10 shots in the center ring with a group size of less than 2 inches at 200 meters. The crowd erupted in amazed chatter. Even the most experienced range instructors had never seen anything like it. A perfect score at 200 meters with a weapon the shooter had never used before was beyond exceptional. It was nearly impossible. James Patterson felt his legs go weak. The mathematical reality was undeniable. Marcus had achieved an overall score of 438 out of 450 possible points. It wasn't just a record, it was a score that redefined what the course was capable of measuring. The ride back to headquarters was conducted in complete silence. 20 Royal Guards sat in the transport vehicle, but only one occupied everyone's thoughts. Marcus Thompson sat in his usual spot at the back, staring out the window at London's passing streets, seemingly oblivious to the stares and whispered conversations surrounding him. James Patterson felt as though his entire worldview had collapsed. For months he had built his identity around being the most capable guard in their unit, the one with real military experience and superior skills. Now he understood that he had been sharing quarters with someone who operated on a completely different level of expertise. 438 points. Danny whispered to the guard beside him. That's not just good, that's impossible. I looked it up on my phone. The previous record was 312 points set by an Olympic shooter. Word had spread through the facility like wildfire. Before they left, Marcus had been approached by several range instructors requesting permission to review the security footage of his performance. One grizzled veteran instructor had pulled Sergeant Williams aside and spoken in urgent, hushed tones about scores that defied explanation. I've been doing this for 37 years, the instructor had said. I've trained Olympic marksmen, special forces operators, and competition shooters from around the world. What I just witnessed isn't just exceptional. It's the kind of shooting that gets people recruited into programs that don't officially exist. Now, as the transport navigated through afternoon traffic, everyone was trying to piece together the mystery of Marcus Thompson. How did a quiet, unassuming man in his 30s develop skills that surpassed elite military operators? What was his real background, and why was he working as a ceremonial guard? Sergeant Williams had spent the entire ride making phone calls, speaking in codes and acronyms that the guards couldn't understand. Whatever he was learning seemed to make him increasingly nervous. His glances toward Marcus became more frequent and more respectful with each conversation. When they arrived at headquarters, instead of the usual dismissal and return to regular duties, Williams asked Marcus to remain behind. The other guards filed out slowly, many turning for one last look at the man who had completely rewritten their understanding of what was possible. Thompson, Williams said quietly once they were alone, I need to ask you directly, what's your real background? Those scores today, they're not possible for someone with standard military training. Marcus remained quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. His cover had been thoroughly blown, and there was no point in maintaining the pretense that he was just another guard who had gotten lucky. I served in the military for 12 years, Marcus said finally, mostly overseas assignments, specialized training. I prefer not to discuss the details. Williams nodded slowly. His phone calls had confirmed what he had begun to suspect. Marcus Thompson's personnel file contained significant gaps and classifications that suggested involvement with Britain's most secretive military units. The thing is, Williams continued, your performance today has attracted attention from people much higher up the chain of command than me. There are going to be questions, investigations, maybe even reassignments. Marcus had expected this. Outstanding performance in any official capacity inevitably led to scrutiny, and scrutiny was the last thing someone trying to live a quiet life needed. He had hoped to blend in, to serve out his time as a ceremonial guard without drawing attention to skills he preferred to keep buried. I understand, Marcus said. I'll accept whatever consequences come from today. Williams studied the older guard with new respect. For what it's worth, Thompson, I've never seen anything like what you did today. Whatever your real story is, whatever brought you to this assignment, you've got skills that most people can only dream of. As Marcus walked to his quarters that evening, he reflected on how quickly everything had changed. One day of weapons testing had destroyed the anonymity he had worked so hard to maintain. Soon, people would start asking questions he didn't want to answer about missions he couldn't discuss and skills he wished he could forget. But there was also a small part of him that felt relief. For the first time in years, he had been able to demonstrate the abilities that had once defined him, the skills that had kept him and his teammates alive in impossible situations around the world. 3 days after the shooting test, Marcus was summoned to an office he had never seen before, located in a section of the headquarters building that required special clearance to access. The nameplate on the door read, Colonel Harrison, Special Operations Liaison. Marcus knocked and entered to find a distinguished older man in civilian clothes studying a thick file. Sergeant Major Thompson, Colonel Harrison said, using a rank that Marcus hadn't heard in 5 years. Please have a seat. We need to discuss your rather spectacular performance at the range this week. Marcus sat down, maintaining the same calm demeanor that had served him well throughout his military career. He had expected this meeting from the moment his scores were posted. Exceptional performance always attracted attention from the intelligence community. Your current assignment to the Royal Guard was supposed to be a quiet posting, Harrison continued, flipping through pages marked with security classifications. A chance to transition to civilian life after your service with 22 SAS Regiment. 12 years of operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and several other locations I'm not permitted to discuss even in this room. The colonel set down the file and looked directly at Marcus. Your record shows 47 confirmed eliminations at ranges exceeding 800 meters, successful completion of the counter-revolutionary warfare course, and decorations including the Military Cross for extraordinary valor under fire. You were, by all accounts, one of the finest snipers the regiment ever produced. Marcus said nothing, though memories of those distant missions flickered through his mind. Desert compounds where he had spent days motionless in concealment. Urban environments where a single shot had prevented terrorist attacks. Teammates who hadn't made it home. The weight of decisions made in milliseconds that had saved lives or ended them. The question, Harrison continued, is what happens now. Your scores this week have been reviewed by every marksmanship expert in the military. 438 out of 450 points isn't just exceptional. It's a demonstration of skills that we thought you had left behind. Marcus finally spoke. I tried to hold back, sir. But muscle memory and training take over. When you've done something 10,000 times in situations where failure means death, it becomes automatic. Harrison nodded with understanding. We know you requested the ceremonial posting specifically to avoid operational assignments. Your psychological evaluation noted signs of combat fatigue and a desire to serve in a capacity that didn't require the use of lethal skills. The truth was more complicated than any evaluation could capture. Marcus had grown tired of being a weapon pointed at Britain's enemies. He wanted to protect rather than eliminate, to stand guard over something beautiful and peaceful rather than hunting through war zones. The Royal Guard had seemed like the perfect solution, service that mattered without the moral complexity of special operations. However, Harrison continued, events have a way of complicating our best intentions. We have a situation developing that requires someone with your particular expertise. A credible threat against the royal family has emerged, one that our regular security protocols may not be adequate to address. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had hoped those days were behind him, that he could serve out his time in peaceful obscurity. But duty had a way of calling regardless of personal preferences. The threat involves individuals with advanced military training, possibly foreign operatives with sniper capabilities. Our intelligence suggests they're planning something during the upcoming state visit next month. We need someone who can think like they think, who can anticipate their methods and capabilities. Harrison stood and walked to the window overlooking the courtyard, where Marcus and his fellow guards conducted their daily ceremonies. You know this environment better than anyone now. You understand the sightlines, the vulnerabilities, the challenges of providing security in these historic locations. Combined with your operational experience, you're uniquely qualified to help us address this threat. Marcus considered the implications. Accepting would mean returning to the world he had tried to leave behind, becoming a hunter again rather than a guardian. But refusing might mean allowing harm to come to the people he had sworn to protect. What exactly are you asking me to do, sir? Harrison returned to his desk and pulled out a new file, this one marked with classifications Marcus recognized from his SAS days. We're asking you to temporarily resume your former role as a sniper, but with a defensive mission. You would help design our security protocols, identify potential threat positions, and serve as our counter-sniper specialist during the state visit. Marcus thought of his fellow guards, especially young James Patterson, who had learned a hard lesson about making assumptions. He thought of the tourists who gathered each day to watch the ceremonies, and the royal family members who trusted their guards to keep them safe. When do I start?